Hey guys, thanks for dropping back in again today. It's been a little bit colder lately with some snowfall and some cooler temperatures, so I haven't been able to get out and fly as much as I'd like to and do my troubleshooting videos as well. So the video I have for you today has actually been requested of me on how I go about setting up my quads on my Tyrannus and in Betaflight, and what I do to get to accomplish the videos that I do put out there, my freestyle videos. I know it's not like steel or schizo smooth, but I feel like I've kind of gotten things dialed in to the way that I like them, and I'm still further working on tuning, still kind of getting more knowledgeable about tuning as well, and it's kind of just a learn as you go sort of thing. So I'm just going to take you through on what I do and when I set up my quads. It's definitely a lengthy video, so hopefully you can stick around, watch the whole thing, or even just kind of bounce around to the parts that you need. I'm going to briefly touch on firmware flashing. A lot of the flight controllers out there are very similar, not the same, so the process in order to flash your firmware onto your flight controller is pretty much identical across the board. You just need to make sure you have the appropriate firmware. We're also going to do some S-Bus setup. I went over in a previous video on how to solder and connect S-Bus to your flight controller. Here I'm going to go through and show you how to get everything configured in Betaflight so that it's working properly. We're going to do some endpoint adjustment just to make sure that you're getting the full 1,000 units that you have in between your extremes of each axis that you put into on your transmitter. We're also going to be doing some ESC calibration, very brief. Again, ESCs are similar to the flight controller in the fact that there's a ton of them out there. They're very similar, not identical. You just want to make sure that you have the appropriate firmware for your ESCs so you don't brick them. We're also going to be doing some low-end motor calibration. I like to do this in order to make sure that I have the lowest possible motor spin up, but it's still smooth at the same time, because I don't personally use air mode, so I like a really low RPM on my motors whenever I'm at zero throttle, so that when I'm inverted, I don't get any excessive pull to back down towards the ground. And I'm also going to briefly go over my PIDs and my tuning and how I go about doing all of that. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and yeah, hopefully you learned something. So there are a lot of flight controllers out there, and flashing firmware to it is, it's very general. It's pretty much the same thing for every flight controller, but the firmware that is needed for each individual flight controller varies. I don't even know the exact firmware that's needed for every single flight controller. So you want to be very careful that you're choosing the right firmware for your craft, because if you don't, you'll brick your craft, and then you have to go into bootloader mode. It just makes everything a lot more of a pain in the ass. So what you want to do, and an easy way to tell what firmware you're on, is plug your quad in, your flight controller, click connect, and a lot of people have this log hidden, so all you see is one line. I love to see the log because then it tells you exactly what's going on. You can also see what version is on your quad at that time. So I'm running Betaflight version 3.0, which is perfect. And then it says the board is the X-Racer C3. So that's my board that I'm running, which is great. So if I go down to firmware here, I can search for I'm pretty sure this is the one. And see, this is where you don't want to be pretty sure, you want to be 100% sure. But I've got the X-Racer on here. Then you can choose, yeah, so this is going to be the right one, 3.0.1, even a new firmware for me. I'm just going to keep it at the same because I know it flies and it flies well. So you're going to load that, and then you're going to come down here and you're going to click flash. So I'll load it for you guys just to show you. So you click load firmware, and then it's going to come up like this, and it'll give you the flash option, and then you can flash it. I'm not going to do that right now just because, like I said, I don't want to mess with the reflashing of my quad here. Sometimes it's going to say bootloader failed, or failed to connect to bootloader, and essentially what you're going to want to do is you're going to have it disconnected. You're going to select flash on connect, and you're also going to select your firmware. So that what happens is you're going to plug this in, boop, and it's going to start flashing it automatically, or it should. With the X-Racer, it's kind of interesting because it's got this little button right here that sometimes you have to press. So that is the bootloader button. So instead of having to solder 2 pins together or anything like that, you just press the bootloader button and it will put it into bootloader mode for you. It's tricky to press. Sometimes I've had to do it 3 or 4 times. Like you press it and you plug it in and it doesn't work. Try it again, press it, plug it in. If that doesn't work, just keep trying it. It'll eventually work. Sometimes it's real finicky on wanting to connect with that bootloader. So just keep trying it and then eventually it will work. So I mean, as far as flashing goes, I want to mention Joshua Bardwell. He's got a ton of videos, probably for every single flight controller. I'll put a link to his channel up in the top here and the description below, so that if you want to get specific with your flight controller, you'll be able to find out the exact firmware and everything that you're going to need to use. So obviously we still have our quad connected. In order to set up S-Bus properly, you're going to want to go into ports here, and at least on my flight controller, which is the X-Racer F303 flight controller, my UART 3 is where S-Bus is ran through. So you're going to want to make sure you click Serial RX on whatever UART your flight controller has S-Bus set up through. I've also got on my smart port telemetry set up through UART 2, and that is going to be on the the TX soldering pad on your flight controller. And I mentioned that in a previous video. I'll go ahead and try to throw a link up to it now and the exact time that we were talking about that in one of my previous videos. So make sure you have Serial RX set up. Then you're going to want to go into your configuration tab and you're going to want to scroll down a little bit here. And you're going to want to click and select serial based receiver S-Bus. So essentially that's going to enable serial mode on your receiver. Then you're going to go down here and click S-Bus. Super simple. I've forgotten to do this a couple of times and I was totally confused as to what was going on. You need to make sure you select S-Bus and serial receiver here. And essentially that is all you need to do in order to set up S-Bus. You can click telemetry here and that helps to send out telemetry from the flight controller if you have it soldered on. If you don't have any telemetry wires soldered onto your flight controller, then that is mute. You don't really need to do any of that. So let's move on to the next thing. S-Bus receiver setup is super simple. Okay, so we're going to dive a little bit into things that have to do with Betaflight. So first things first, we're going to finish up setting up our switches here. So we're going to go into our modes tab, my mistake, and we're going to add a range here. I've already got a range added. That's where you want to select auxiliary 1. That is the key when you're creating the inputs and the mixers on your controller, that you want to make sure it's named properly. Then you can go ahead and select the range that you want your arm switch to be activated. I like it all the way down at the very end there, so that when I click all the way down, it's going to go all the way down, and you can actually see it moving around there as I am flicking the switch that I have set. So that's how you can tell that the receiver 1 is connected, which is perfect. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to go and show you how to do some endpoint calibration, which is definitely very key because you want a full 1,000 units whenever you are, when you want 1,000 units between all of your various endpoints on your controller. So if you can see when I'm doing this in the receiver tab here, so we'll start with roll. So roll right now is sitting at about 1,500. I'll show you how to calibrate this to try to smooth out this bouncing and everything. So you're going to go all the way to the left, see how it goes to 1,000, and then if you go all the way to the right, it goes to 998. So it's actually not quite there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into menu. We're going to page all the way down until you see outputs. So this is where you're going to go in and you're going to actually adjust things. And this may get a little complicated, but it's super easy. So really you want to see which one is roll, so that's going to be the second one here. So we're going to go down to number 2 here, go across, and so what you're going to do is go all the way to the right. So see it says 1998, so we need to go over 1, and let's start going up with this number. Okay, so as you see, I went from 97.8 and it was at 1998, going up to 98 even. That brings our roll up to 2,000 even, and that is what you want. You want a range of 1,000 to 2,000 so that there's a full 1,000 units in between far left and far right. So we're going to go ahead and do that with all of them. So we can exit that now, which is nice. And we see which one our pitch is, and we can see the arrow moving back and forth there as we pitch. So we're going to go down one. Actually, we'll see if this even, so it's 1,000 and 2,000. So we don't need to adjust anything on our pitch axis. So we're actually going to exit that. Next we're going to do our yaw. So we got 1,001 all the way up to 2,000. So we should do our yaw. So that's number 3 down here. So let's go down one. We're going to go over to this one. We're going to go select it, and we're going to go all the way to the right. Let's try that one more time. So that goes up, go down a little bit in number, and now we can see now that it's at 1,000 even. So that's what we're looking for. Go ahead and select exit, and then you'll bring you back to the main side here. Now you can kind of see if they don't center properly, you'll get a little bit of you want this number, these 3 numbers here, to be 1,500 on the dot, or as close as you possibly can get. So the pitch axis is number 3 here. So we're going to go up, go to the pitch axis, and then we're going to go over to this one here, this column right here. So essentially what this is going to do is it's going to shift the whole midpoint. So we want to select that, and we're going to go, keep going up, and you can see it's starting to creep closer to 1,500 now. It's bouncing back and forth between 1,501. There we go. Nice and solid on the midpoint there. So we're good with that one. Exit. Now we can see our yaw is just off by 1. And actually, let's go back into this one real quick and try to see if one more number will stop that from bouncing. Okay, so now we need to kind of bring it back down because so you kind of want to just fine-tune it to when it sits properly. So I like that number there. So now we're going to go down to our yaw. We're going to drop this a little bit. So to 0.1 there. Kind of give your gimbals a little flick to kind of get it to it so it auto levels there and centers itself up. Okay, so that's actually it for all of the endpoint adjustment there. You want to do that with every single one just to make sure that you get a good 1,000 unit difference in between everything except for your throttle. Do not mess with the throttle at all because, and it looks like I have messed with the throttle. Huh, because there's a number there. Just don't mess with the throttle unless you really need to. I think the reason I have the throttle up there is because I limited it to 2,000 and I didn't want it to go any farther than 2,000, but I'm okay with it being at 987 at the very bottom here. So you want to adjust the far right number here to make sure that it's at 2,000 because you don't want to go above 2,000 on your throttle command. So now we've got this little flickering right here where it's bouncing back and forth. That's where you want to go ahead and throw in some deadband. I've got some RC deadband going on right now. So I'm going to go with 1 unit above what I had. We're going to save it. And it's definitely solidified a lot of these numbers. They're not bouncing around as much, and that's exactly what you want. Also be sure that when you are going in, you have the JR Spectrum Grapner if you're using a Tyrannus, because that will align it as TAER, and that's throttle, elevon, and rudder. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your different channels. Channel 1, 2, 3, 4. So that it's inputted properly, because sometimes you might not get any response if it is not inputted properly. Okay, you guys, so we're I'm gonna touch very briefly on ESC calibration. There are many different ESCs out there, and just like the flight controller, I don't want to show you a specific way for one type of ESC and then it doesn't happen to work for your specific ESCs. So in order to flash firmware to your ESCs, you're going to need BL Heli Suite. And that is this program right here. It seems like it may be very complicated at first, but really when you get into it, there's not much that you need to use. So obviously you're going to need your flight controller connected, assuming I mean, you've got your ESCs connected to your flight controller. So most flight controllers these days have the pass-through capability to where all you need to do is connect your flight controller. If you don't have pass-through capability, then you're going to individually have to flash firmware to individual ESCs at a time, and you won't be able to do all 4 of them at the same time. So let me kind of go in a little bit finer detail here. You're going to want to power your quad. So we're going to power this on real quick. Make sure your props are off. We do not want anybody getting their fingers chopped off. So after you have your quad powered and connected via flight controller there, you're going to enter BL Heli and you're going to select the COM here. Mine is COM 7. Click connect, and then you're going to click check. And what this is going to do is going to read the ESCs and see what everything is that is on them. As you can see right now, I've got a master and my slaves are not in sync with the master. So essentially that could mean a couple of things. It could mean that your beep strength or your beacon strength are different than each other, and you can level that out. But most of the time it's the throttle, the max throttle and the min throttle on your PPM settings. So if I unclick 1 here, you can see that the max throttle changed on number 2. So let's undo this. ESC 3 and 2 are the same, and number 4 is even lower on the max throttle of 1908. And so we're going to select all of these again and enable them. Now in order to flash your setup, you're going to click flash and you're going to choose the correct, usually it chooses it for you, but you want to make sure, like absolutely positive, the most thing you're sure about on your quad is this, because you don't want to brick your ESCs. Make sure you have this correct firmware selected. Then you're going to click OK. It's going to ask you all these questions like, are you sure you want to flash it, yada yada, please be careful, make sure you take your props off. Hopefully you've already done all of this. Just click through all of the things, say yes, and then at the end, it should be at the end here, and you'll have all of the same firmware, and you can see the firmware version right here. All of them are the same version. So what I'm going to do in order to make everything the same, and then we're going to go back into Betaflight and calibrate, what you want to do is make everything, put it 1000 and 2000. 1000 is the min, 2000 is the max. Everything else is same. You should have damped light enabled. A lot of the ESCs are damped light enabled these days. I don't think there's many that are not. Go ahead and click write setup, and now it's going to write all of them, and the ESCs are all okay. Click check again. Now you can see that all of my ESCs are in sync with each other, but that's not necessarily the best thing that you want right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect from BL Heli Suite. We're going to go back into Betaflight. I'm going to power down my quad. Keep it connected to your flight controller though. Then you're going to go into your motors tab, and there's many ESC calibration videos out there, so if this one doesn't help you, maybe look into Joshua Bardwell's videos. He's got a lot of great videos on ESC calibration, and of course if you have D-Shot, you don't really need to do any of this because it's taking care of it for you. We're going to click the motor test mode notice here, and we're going to power all the way up, full throttle. Make sure your props are off for this. Please do not have any props connected. Power on. You should get the ESC calibration tone. Power throttle all the way down. And that should work for you. The multi-shot calibration tone is very, very short. Other ones are very long, so you know you're in calibration mode. So obviously it's working now. We're going to move right into motor low-end calibration. So what I need to know is what my motor spins at the lowest throttle input. So what you're going to do is you're going to just take one motor here, and you're going to inch it up here, kind of go to like right before you see it start spinning, go a little bit lower, and then creep it up with your up arrow. So you can see it's kind of a jittery, see how it's kind of skipping and jittering right here. We want to go a little bit higher. So I'm going to say 1045 is when I get a good spin out of this motor here. So we're going to drop it all the way down. Do a check on number 3 maybe. See if that starts spinning at the same one. So 1045. That's a really good spin. It's very low RPM. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that number, 1045. We're going to go back into, let's uncheck this so it doesn't start spinning up. Go back into our configuration tab. and you're actually going to, 10, 50, 65. So let's add 10 to it. So I'm going to change this to 1055. This is what your minimum throttle is. So when you give the lowest input on your throttle, boop, 1 notch like that, or when you arm your quad, assuming you've got air mode or you don't have motor stop enabled, it's going to start spinning at 1055, which is good. It's a nice low number. Then you're going to go ahead and save and reboot that, and essentially that is low-end calibration. You want to see what your motor starts spinning at so that they're not spinning too high when you first initially arm. So I'm going to give a quick, brief rundown on PID tuning and how to tune your quad. I really like the method that Schizo provided. Essentially, he's saying that you don't want to touch Ds at all, and I rarely touch Ds. I use the stock or the stock variable that Betaflight gives me. Typically it's 18. I think they've actually bumped it up to like 21 and 22. So I drop my Ds back down to 18 here, just to keep it nice and safe. And what I really mess with is the P. So essentially what you're looking for is whenever you hit the throttle, if you see any oscillation on whatever axis that you see that oscillation, you want to increase the P variable. Until it, if it starts getting worse, then you want to drop the P variable, of course. Next is the eyes. I've just started dabbling with the eyes here. From what I understand, I is the past. So P is present, I is past, and D is the future. So what the flight controller is essentially doing is it's trying to predict these things or account for them for past events. So from what I've heard, kind of researched on all this for, is essentially when you're upside down and you're kind of doing an inverted hang with 0 throttle, if you get any washy feeling, like your quad is kind of moving, that's when you want to increase I on whatever axis that you're getting the washing feeling. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that for me has worked. I've just started increasing the I's and started noticing a little bit of a difference. But P is the main thing that you want to touch. Try not to touch D if you can. A lot of people, when I first started, were like, give her more D, give her more D. But that's not what you want. D is going to create warmth in your motors. So typically I'll do a test fly, and if I feel like my motors are they're warmer than they should be, I will drop D by a couple of variables, and that usually solves the problem. Next is your rates. Rates are all personal preference. If you want the quad to feel super snappy and really responsive, then you want to up your rates a lot. I mean, maybe not a lot because it's still pretty responsive to begin with, but this is my racer quad. So I like low rates on my racer quad just so that I know I'm not overdoing anything, because it all depends on your setup too. I'm running 2600 kV motors, and these things spin so fast that it's very, very responsive, so I don't need a really high a rate on my yaw, pitch, and roll axis. I do recommend doing some RC Expo. I don't have any on this one, but I'm going to put some more on there. I honestly am going to start off, at 10 for my pitch and roll rates, because I don't want a lot of responsiveness towards the center of the controller. So essentially what Expo does for you is when you barely move the stick, it'll really barely move. But then when you slam it over, it really gives you that super quick rate to whatever axis you're going on, you have a very fast roll, flip, whatever rate that you're doing. If you don't have any Expo, you barely move it, you'll get a really quick rate right off the bat, and then it'll of course get a lot faster the farther you go out. But Expo softens that so you can have minute stick movements, but not have over excessive responsiveness on your quad. So I'm going to try a little bit of Expo on this quad, and I think that's going to actually help out a lot with control when I am racing. So we're going to go and save that. Now, one thing I've also been advised on is if you're punching out and you're at super high oscillation and you get you're at super high RPMs with the throttle here, and you get any oscillations, that may mean that you want to add some TPA to your setup. And essentially what TPA does is it lowers your PIDs at a super high throttle so that they're not as aggressive and they're a little bit more tamed down. I haven't really had any problems with this quad, so I leave it at whatever the stock number that Betaflight gave me. And that seems to be pretty much it with any of the PIDs and the tunings. If you have any more like specific questions about this and how I go about doing it, please leave it in the comments below. I'd definitely love to answer any of those questions and clear up any confusion if there is any. Alright guys, so obviously there's a little bit more that meets the eye to properly setting up your quad. Not all of these things are absolutely necessary when you are going to set up your quad. These are just things that I like to do. There's tons of resources on the internet. I like to pull from every single resource and kind of create my own method, and that's the method that I delivered to you guys today. The things that I like to do in order to make sure that my quad is flying how I like it. So hopefully this video helped you out. Please leave any comments, questions, or concerns that you may have about anything that I've gone over today if I didn't cover it enough in detail. Or if you have a request on a next video that you'd like to see, maybe I can throw something together and see if I can't help you guys out. I really love hearing feedback, and especially when people are telling me that it's keeping them in the air, my videos are helping keep them in the air. That really makes me feel good, and really makes me know that I'm actually helping out and doing what I set out to do when I originally started these troubleshooting videos. So yeah, like, share, subscribe, and leave me any comments, feedback. I love hearing feedback. Alright you guys, I'll catch you out there. So please, yeah, like, subscribe.